Welcome back to Earth Station Trek, a show where we trek from the early days on NBC to the future on Paramount Plus and everywhere in between. I'm Charles Kelso, and it's my privilege to introduce the Earth Station Trek crew, Keith Johnson.
Did you know in Base 8, this is our 16th episode?
Alan Seiler.
Hi.
And Veronica Daschel.
Hi.
And this is our 200th episode.
Yay!
Woo!
Wow.
How long have we been doing this show? Like 4 years now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
2021 was when we started.
Oh, yeah.
I hate to ask. I was going to text you guys and say, what was actually the show start date? And then I was like, well, 52 weeks a year, this and that, blah, 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 2021. So I don't remember the exact date.
It was like December, January or December
It
of
was January. Well, December when we started, but January when we went live.
Yes, exactly. Because we recorded like a bank of episodes before we started broadcasting.
Yeah, remember when we used to record our show in advance and edit it and stuff before it went out to the public?
And Chuck would spend the entire weekend working on the episode.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, our 200th episode, that's a big deal. We've been doing the show for a long time now.
Yeah.
Right.
So this is going to be a little bit more of a freewheeling show. We've got some topics we want to talk about, really about how Star Trek has changed, how we've changed just in the amount of time we've been doing this show. I mean, I guess sort of leading off, like this show for all of us was just a pandemic project. During lockdown. We didn't have a whole lot to do. But we enjoy it. We've talked to each other every week about Star Trek now for 4 years for 200 episodes.
Yeah, I started out doing a YouTube show. We were reviewing. This is when Discovery first started, and I had people on, and we were doing reviews of each Discovery episode after it aired. And then I kept kind of doing it a little bit, and then God, I don't remember, but I know. However, this got started, I got roped in somehow, and there was somebody else involved that kind of dropped out before we started broadcasting.
I have a vague recollection of there being like a fifth person for a while.
Yeah. And it ended up being the four of us, and that worked out just fine.
Right. You imagine having a fifth person we're trying to make decisions with?
Jesus, monkeys.
Oh my God. We have a hard enough time with the four of us.
I think 4 is like the max number of hosts for a podcast.
Right.
Adding in 1 or 2 guests with 4 hosts is already madness enough.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like most people know, Veronica and I do a lot of stage shows, puppet shows and burlesque shows and things like that. But during the pandemic and the lockdown, everything just stopped.
Yeah.
So we were just climbing the walls and needed something. I think it was Mike Faber posted on ESO Network that they're looking to start a Star Trek show. And we're like, we'll do that. That sounds great.
Right.
That gives us something to freaking do.
Right.
And we got to talk to you guys all the time, and it turned out great.
Make new friends. Like all of our friends now we met because we started this podcast. All of our good friends are because the ESO Network. So, yay!
Nice.
How about you, Keith?
So here's a couple of comments, real quick. Matt Sweatman, our good buddy, says, "Happy 200th episode. Math tells me it would take 8 days and 8 1/3 days to listen to all the episodes back to back." Well, you better get started. And then our good buddy Tiger Blade 2002, aka Wayne, says, "Hey, happy 200."
Hey, Wayne.
And he also calls it our bicentennial.
Yeah.
Mark calls it our bicentennial, not Wayne.
Oh, well, sorry, that was Mark. Oh, my bad.
Yeah, and Matt's got a comment there that I see a green screen, which people may notice is there. Veronica and I were just recently filming some promotional material for a music video collab that we've got coming out. Felt Nerdy and a local artist. We filmed a music video together, and we were filming some promotional stuff for that. So that's why the green screen's there. We're not doing anything, any weather reports or anything tonight.
No. Not that we'd be able to weather report, especially right now in Georgia.
Right.
Here's our
we can do it as accurately as they do.
Yeah.
Maybe it will snow. Maybe it will not. Find out tomorrow.
Find out as it happens.
Yeah. Keith, how did you get roped into this podcast?
Mike Faber and I have known each other for a few years, and I think I've told the story before. It's really ironic. I listen to a ton of podcasts, and I used to listen to Earth Station 1 with Mike Faber and Bobby Nash and Mike Gordon. And I've told this story before, but I work downtown in the American Cancer Society building. So when DragonCon comes to town, on like Thursday, I just go walking. Me and my buddies, we go walking. You don't need a ticket. You just go walk. It's right there. So I was working on a Friday. I was late to lunch by 2 hours. I go over to Peachtree Center. I'm walking through the Peachtree Center, and I hear a voice, and I was like, that sounds like it was Bobby Nash. And I recognized Bobby Nash. Has never seen the guys. And then I went up to him. I said, are you by chance? And it was Bobby Nash and Mike Gordon, Mr. Howdy. And so I became friends with my favorite. He had me on his show once and interviewed me. We just became friends. And then I guess, a few years later, he asked me if I was interested in doing the Star Trek podcast. I've never done a podcast before in my life, which might be surprising.
Yeah, me neither.
And it's funny because I remember when things like Discovery. Yeah, I remember when things like Discovery and stuff were premiering. Well, I've been watching Star Trek for over 50 years. And so I've just been always the guy talking to people, talking to my brothers, talking to folks, posting all the time on the internet. But I never really had a podcast and a focused podcast like this. And one thing it's helped me do sometimes is like for me, even when things like Discovery may have dragged a little bit for me, not that I disliked it or work gets busy, I can fall behind. I remember I fell behind Deep Space Nine and I fell behind on Voyager, not because I like them, because I saw them first run, because life got in the way. And what this has really done, like I have friends, like I had a friend last night, he said, dude, I want to talk to you about the Star Trek episode, but I don't know if you're up on it. I said, dude, I'm up on all Star Trek right now.
I have to.
Yeah, and that's actually been cool.
Yeah, that's one thing that's been a big impact for me is, I mean, back in the 90s and 2000s, like my brother and our friends used to go out to the movies on Friday night. And then after the movie, we'd go to like Applebee's or Chili's or something, and then I'll sit and talk about the movie. And it's more exciting to talk to them about the movie than it was seeing the movie itself. Like who liked this, who liked that, and so forth. And it's kind of similar like when Walking Dead came out, and all the guys at work were talking about it every day. So I had to watch Walking Dead when it came out, or else I was out of the conversation. That's something that this show has really done for me. That's what this is for me virtually now. Is sometimes I'm watching a Star Trek episode and thinking like, oh, Alan will like that, or Keith, they messed the science up. Keith's gonna be all over that, and that kind of thing is going to change the way I watch these Star Trek episodes.
Yep,
that is true. I do the same things. I'll see something like, I don't know, there'll be a Gorn on screen, and I'll be like, oh, I can't wait to see what Keith's going to say about that this week. And then something else will remind me of Veronica or you, and that is the biggest change for me in how I watch Star Trek, is that you guys are always in my mind when I do it.
Sorry,
you live in your brain forever.
And it's also funny to have Veronica on because I've been watching longer than Veronica's been alive. So it's very interesting.
Significantly longer than Veronica's been alive. Sorry.
Not that significantly.
So you get
longer than Charles has been alive too.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess that's true. Yeah, that's right. Wow. I keep forgetting. Wow. And it's interesting to get the different perspectives sometimes. Very different perspectives. And I will say, not for nothing, it means nothing, but I was actually, and it's funny, we talked about taste. I will tell the guys behind the scenes today, we were joking about, everybody's heard Section 31 is unfortunately getting bad reviews ahead of time.
Oh boy.
So Alan and I were joking with Charles, like, is he going to come out and go, wow, Enterprise is better than this? Because we found out that Charles doesn't like Enterprise. And it's funny because when I first kind of sort of knew you, Charles, I would have bet money you loved Enterprise because of how it looks and what it was supposed to be. I know, right?
You'd have lost money.
Speaking of Enterprise, we have a comment from Mark. He says, it's been a long time.
Yeah, Mark.
Yeah, we all have faith of the heart, Mark.
That's right.
Well, Keith,
I have faith of the spleen.
Keith, one of the things that you suggested we talk about tonight was sort of how Star Trek has changed since we've been doing this podcast.
Yeah. I mean, just we look at the thing, because like it's funny to me because I think you guys were talking about COVID and stuff before we started. And it's funny because to me, even now, the world and the timeline seems so weird because of COVID. Like, I was thinking about, I was going back and looking again. Discovery premiered in 2017. Mm-hmm. 8 years ago. Yes. Isn't that crazy? Mm-hmm. 8 years ago. Because COVID got in the way and stuff got frozen and it got delayed. Now, I'm like, I remember sitting on the couch watching Discovery, loving the fact that Michelle Yeoh was there, remembering what an incredibly beautiful show it looked like. And that was 8 years ago.
Yeah.
I was in a whole different age group at 8 years ago. It's really frightening.
Yeah. I remember when Discovery premiered in 2017, one of the big sticking points for me for the first several seasons was the fact that it was TVMA, because my daughter was born in 2006, so she was 11. So I was so stoked. There's a new Star Trek. I could show it to my daughter. And then they announce it and it's TVMA. And I'm like, what the F, man? And I was so annoyed. And that bothers me much less now because she's 18 now, right? So she can watch, she watches The Boys. It's her favorite TV show right now, you know? So it matters a lot less than it did then. But it's funny how sort of life has changed since Star Trek's been back.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because we were talking about how Star Trek is. I think recently I called it New Trek, and you kind of said, well, that's not really New Trek. So jokingly, I call it New Trek because I don't even know what you call it anymore. But I know that there's been a journey with it because Discovery, frankly, it's still kind of like hated by a lot of people. I'm not even going to say majority, but a significant enough people can't stand Discovery for a whole bunch of reasons. And then you get Lower Decks, and which ironically may be the most true to Star Trek of all the shows, even though it's kind of a silly animated, or at least the old Berman Braga track, which is cool. And then you got, and then there's people, thank you, 90s Trek. And then there's people I know who just despise Discovery, but love Strange New Worlds. And I think the biggest surprise for me, I don't know if all of us, was probably Prodigy, because I remember saying clearly, man, this seems like a Star Wars inspired show aimed at kids. And wow, that thing grew. I think we talked about every single week that show got better and changed. And I think for me, what I've come away with, and I've said this a million times, I have always been very honest about what I don't like in Star Trek. I do not care for the Kelvinverse, but I don't hate any Star Trek. And so kind of like Charles posted today about Section 31, which Charles like, I'm going to watch it and then I'm going to see what I think about it. You know, there's not like, I hate it before it even airs. Discovery has a lot of things that remind me of the Star Trek I don't like. The Kurtzman Trek, I guess you call it. There's a lot of things about it I don't like. There's a lot of things about it I love. And I think of all the Star Trek I've seen recently, I think I have my strongest dislike for Picard, first 2 seasons, unfortunately. But I think staying with it, they've done a good job with Star Trek. There's certain elements I wonder if they will ever come back from what I love from Star Trek. But I think I'm pretty happy to know that after watching Star Trek for 55 years now, nonstop, I'm still enjoying it and still looking forward to it. Because I tell you guys, I see a lot of people who are just like, they've given up on all this Trek. They're just done.
Right.
And I don't ever want to be that person.
I have a name for this era of Trek.
Okay.
What?
Hindsight Trek. Because it was mostly produced in the 2020s, and hindsight is 2020.
Wow!
Wow!
Oh no!
Okay, Charles,
long way around to get to that.
Charles is gonna have to insert a bump sound for that.
Right. We'll put that in the idea box.
Or you can just call it 2020s Trek.
Yeah.
Like we called 90s Trek, even though did TNG start in like 87 or something?
Yeah.
And see, Discovery started in 2017. Exactly the difference between 90s Trek. So this could be 2020s Trek or hindsight Trek, depending on your preference.
Okay.
Depending on how Veronica
it's official. It's been decided.
I'm gonna stick with new Trek for now. Yeah, leading up to when we started the podcast, I was pretty down on sort of the new Star Trek era. I had very mixed feelings about Discovery. There was a point like halfway through season 1 of Discovery, I rage quit the show.
Yes.
And I didn't watch the back half of season 1 until after Veronica made me, when season 2 was coming out. And it was, in part because of what I was just talking about with my, trying to watch it with my kid. And that was really the lure for me for Star Trek at that time. But then there was that 1 week where on Star Trek, you had the Klingon rape scene with Laurel and Ash Tyler. I think it was the same week that on like the Orville, which is kind of Trek adjacent, you had the sex with the blob scene with Cassidy Yates, whose name on the Orville I forget, and the blob. And I was just like, forget these shows. I'm tired of this. And I quit watching it.
Wow.
And I didn't watch the back half of season 1 of Discovery or the entire Mirror Universe arc until Veronica made me sit through it before season 2. And then season 2, I liked it about the same, about the first half. And then it was really one of our first episodes on this podcast was talking about season 3 of Discovery, which really turned me around on Discovery. I thought that they just rebooted the show in a very effective way that really captured my interest. I mean, part of just liking any show is liking the story that show is telling. And the story of season 3 was this 23rd century ship that's now in this strange future. And that whole season really worked for me in a way the previous seasons hadn't. I mean, at the same time, though, it was like there was just like one after another. It was like Discovery was this like gritty reboot of Star Trek. And then they announced Picard's coming back, but not the Picard you love. And then it was like Lower Decks is coming, and it's a Star Trek adult comedy from the creators of Rick and Morty. And I was like, enough with the Star Trek except. Like, I just want freaking Star Trek. And I'm very pleased that it took Picard a few years, but Picard finally got to a place that I really enjoyed. And then Lower Decks from the get-go was great. So, I mean, over the last 4 years, it's been really like Star Trek has been like building people. I mean, on the show now, probably think I'm overly positive about things, but there was a time in like 2019, 2020 when I was really not.
Wow, man. I didn't know that you had rage quit the show either.
I didn't either. This is the first I've heard of that.
Surprising.
The night they had the Klingon rape scene with naked latex Klingon lady, and I was like, I'm done. This is not my Star Trek.
I feel like he threw. I remember him throwing something at the TV, and it may have been
not at the TV. I would never throw something at my TV.
Towards the TV, or threw something in the general.
I threw obscenities.
I remember lots of times.
I remember online and even like an ESO network group, because we didn't have Earth Station Track at the time. I remember, Charles, when there was an F-bomb dropped in Discovery.
Yes.
And I remember people lost their minds. Same thing. You know, like I was watching it with my kid, and there's an F-bomb, and then there's a naked Klingon lady. Like, what in the heck? It was a problem.
I kind of feel like they did everything backwards. Like, I feel like they started in a really dark, really disparate place that's going to turn people off. If they had started something in the tone of Strange New Worlds and then moved toward that darker, grittier sort of feel, you would have lured people in a lot more easily and taken them on that journey, rather than like slamming them in the face with a brick wall. You know, here's an F-bomb, here's a rape scene here. You know, that's not what you want from Star Trek. You got to get people on board before you start throwing that stuff at them.
Yeah. And I know they want to broaden the audience.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Keith, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say real quick, Alan, that's a good point, because it's funny when I say that I still remember the opening of Discovery on that planet and the ship coming out of the cloud and stuff. That's not only a beautiful scene visually, it was a great introduction to Giorgio and Burnham. I loved that. The kind of the Battle of the Binary Stars, that stuff was intriguing. You're right. And then it fell off a cliff kind of for some people. I held on, but to what you guys are saying, it got really weirdly dark and stuff. And the next thing you know, you've got Klingons, you've got Giorgio's skull there. And then later on, you've got the Empress eating Kelpians. And and a lot of people just turned off because they were like, where is this going? But that opening was great. It's great, but that wasn't the show we got for a while.
Yeah, the season 1 of Discovery was strange because it was like week 1, people are celebrating the fact that there's 2 women of color who are in command positions, and then by the end of the 2-parter, like one of them is being eaten by Klingons. You know, and they made a big deal when Discovery came back that we have the first gay couple in Star Trek. And then one of them gets fucking stabbed in the throat during the season and dies. And you know what I mean? It's like, what?
I forgot that.
You know what I mean? Like they're deliberately doing things to make the viewers angry. Yeah. But that's going to make people stop watching. You know, and I agree with what Alan said. Like, it would have been smarter to start off with a nice, like, easily digestible Star Trek show. It's modern, but it's the Star Trek you remember, and then we're gonna do like they did with TNG to DS9. We're gonna go a bit darker with the next one now that we have your trust,
right?
Rather than starting off with, you like Star Trek, we're gonna punch you in the face.
Yeah, and it was, it wasn't even just that tonal thing. It was everything. It was this almost complete reinvention of who and what the Klingons are that really turned people off. Yeah. And, that was unnecessary. You could have done Klingons that were updated, modernized, but still recognizably a continuation from the 90s,
Right.
and
not at
make
all like
and not make
any of the prior
now
Klingons.
right. And the thing is, I really loved the fact that every Klingon scene we got for like half a season was in the Klingon language.
That
Now,
was
I know
cool.
that doing subtitles can get expensive and you don't want to keep doing that. And you always have to have some scene where they say, from this point on, only in English for the subtitles, you know?
Right.
But I love the fact that we got to that sort of like view of like an internal view of Klingon culture, and it was a reintroduction to who they were, but it was just so drastic. Now, I didn't really have that much trouble with it, but a lot of people did.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, let me get a couple of comments here that are
Cool.
really good, especially this first one. And that
Mhm.
is Wayne saying, as I've stated often to Keith, I think you guys are Trek geniuses. No matter how much I study the weak subject, there I am, mute and lost and fascinated in your flow. That's so nice of you, man. Thank you so
That's
much.
all me.
Yeah, that's Veronica's expertise.
Yeah, and I will
Matt
say, I said,
That was a joke.
yeah. Go ahead. I'll finish. Go ahead when you read that. I'll
right.
comment on
Okay.
it. But,
Matt says, I feel like with things happening in the world and our country today, we need Trek more than ever.
Indeed.
Yeah.
yes.
And what were you going to say before I get these next two?
Yeah, real quick. It's funny because Wayne and I just had a conversation the other day. And Wayne, I'm saying this again to you public. Wayne will sometimes say, dude, I don't say anything because I just can't compare with you guys in knowledge. Like, dude, it does not matter.
Right.
You don't need
right.
the encyclopedic knowledge of Star Trek. Because at the end of the day, it's kind of like, do you kill the Hoarder or not? That's what Star Trek is all about. You know, do you kill the Hoarder or not? And risk is our business. That's what Star Trek's about. And
yeah, and keep in mind, we speak confidently a lot, but we're wrong a lot. That's fun to do. I used to listen to Star Trek podcasts and like curse at the people on the Star Trek podcast because they're getting things wrong. And now I still do it, but it's me that I'm cursing at for getting things wrong.
Right. There have been times when I've had exactly the right thing in mind, but the word that came out of my mouth was a totally wrong thing. Like I'm thinking Andorian, but for some reason I say the word Vulcan or something dumb like that. And I'm like, well, I just sound like an idiot.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. One of our very first episodes, and one of my first encounters with our friend Betty Beth Glenn 4 years ago was that I mixed up Alan Napier and Charles Napier, and she called me out publicly on it. And she's absolutely right. Wow. I got that wrong. What an embarrassing mistake to make.
Oh, that's so
no
funny.
idea who either of those people are.
All right, a couple of more comments real quick. Matt Sweatman says, Discovery took chances, and eventually those chances started paying off. Yes, agreed.
Yes.
And at some point, now that the whole 5 years has wrapped, we're going to do a Discovery retrospective and talk about a lot of those things and all the changes over those 5 years. But till then, stay tuned. Elaine says, I do love that Lower Decks did explain why there may be bluish Klingons. Right. Let's see. Mark says, we want to go fast. And who doesn't, really, at the end of the day? And Matt says, you guys not only helped to reawaken my love of Trek, you've helped me to bring Elaine along. Thank you. Hey, that's so awesome.
Yay.
I mean, seriously. I mean, as much as we love Trek, the thing that I love the most, and this goes to why I ran a Doctor Who convention for 17 years and why I write books and why I'm now running a Doctor Who track for a new con called Stellar Fest, is that I love being able to share what I love with other people and to introduce new people to it and to get them to love it as well. And kind of be a source, you know, for people who are coming on board who have questions, you know, what the hell is a trill, you know, and then you get a chance to, you know, share, you know, and to encourage their love of it. So, man, thank you so much for saying that. That is my purpose in life as a fan.
That's been the big benefit for me from doing this podcast is just the people that I've met through it. And like Veronica alluded to earlier, a lot of our close friends now are people that we know because we started doing this podcast. And that's really, for me, the success of the podcast is, I mean, just the other night we went out to dinner with Elaine and Matt, We didn't know them, Elaine and Matt, until we started doing this podcast. They were listeners who we became friends with. Now we have a podcast with Elaine. We've gone on vacation with Elaine and Matt. Like they've become very good friends of ours.
You've gone to how many concerts with them?
Unknown.
Right.
Unknown number of concerts
in different states, in at least 3 states.
Yeah.
But I mean,
I feel, go ahead. Sorry.
I was gonna say, for the first 30 years of my life, I was the only Trekkie that I knew in person. And it wasn't until I was in my 20s that I even started connecting with Trekkies online. And I mean, I didn't go to my first convention until I was almost 30 years old or 30 years old.
Yeah, you were 30 years old.
I was 30 years old. So, I mean, the fact that I have people that I know in real life who love Star Trek is, I mean, still seems like a big benefit to me, because for a long time I was the Star Trek person, and I was the person who liked Star Trek, and I was the only Star Trek opinion that mattered because Star Trek was mine, you know. But that's a lonely way to live through middle school and college and high school and adult life, being the only person who likes this thing. And then finally in your 30s to find other people, and now in my 40s to find other people who like it and be able to talk about it and share it is, I mean, it's amazing. The fact that I've got a group of friends to talk about the latest Star Trek episode with is really exciting to me still.
And I want to say that I feel that way about a lot of people that I've met through this podcast. And that the top of the list is the three of you, because I never knew Keith before this. I got to know Keith because of doing this show. But the two of you, I've known for years, because you came to Hulanta and you did your Felt Nerdy shows at Hulanta for I don't know how many years, you know, at least 10, I'm guessing. But I never got to know you, you know, until we've done this show together for the past 3 or 4, whatever it is, years. And I consider you both two of my closest friends now. And I think that the best thing that has come out of this is those connections that I've now made with people that, even people that I knew before doing the show. And now I'm like, I just can't imagine not having you in my life. And I love that.
Yeah. And like, I knew Keith's name by reputation because I'm in the ESO network groups.
Right. Everybody knew Keith's name
and not see a Keith Johnson post along the way. Right. And Keith Johnson posts, I mean, for people who don't know Keith, are like books. You know what I mean? It's like a dissertation. It's not a regular Facebook post. And then like Alan, like you said, we knew you for many years as just the guy in charge of Hulanta. That's one of the conventions we would communicate with you to book our shows and things like that. But I mean, all those years we were in contact and not friends is so strange now. Or all the times that I saw Keith Johnson's name on the ESO network groups and we weren't friends. And now I can't, I mean, we talk in some capacity, either in Facebook posts or private messages every day for the last 4 years.
Right.
And now if you guys disappeared, it would be like a hole in my life.
Absolutely. Oh, we all love each other. Yeah, that's so
that's
sweet.
good, because if we found out we hated each other and ended the podcast, it would be a strange show.
It's so true. It's so true.
Yeah, I do think doing a show like I said, what has helped is I probably would have kept up. But like Charles, if like you said, you rage start watching Discovery. Well, you know, you couldn't do that now because we have the show to do. And there's been a couple times like, you know, I know you guys, I'm the only one who's not doing all this other extracurricular activity like music and other shows and stuff like that. But I work a lot because of my job. I do a lot of IT stuff. And there are just days where I've been like, I'm tired. I was up till 3 o'clock. I'll watch Star Trek tomorrow. And I haven't been able really to do that. But it's kept me up because, again, I know people who are absolute Star Trek fans who just gave up. So like, I hate Discovery, and they're just done. That was a cartoon. I can't be good. They're just done. And I'd hate to fall behind because, again, like I said, I did that once with Discovery. Actually, I did that with Deep Space Nine and Voyager just because of life, not because I didn't like them. And so I love being able to keep up on it like this. And some people may never come back. You know, I think Star Trek evolves, and we kind of have to evolve. I don't think it will ever be quite like. Of course, it can't be the original series. And when I say it's not like the original series, I don't mean because the original series had a little bit more kind of sort of sexism and stuff. I personally still don't know that I've seen a Star Trek that in some ways is as good as the original series. In some ways, there's like a dramatic level that Roddenberry and them brought because so many of those people were established TV writers and stuff. and I've never seen anything quite like it. But that doesn't mean that Strange New Worlds is bad because it's not quite like the original series. And TNG is not bad because it's not quite like it. And so I love the fact that this has made me stay on top of, because I've never even seen Rick and Morty. I'm like you, Charles. I just knew they were those guys, those weird big eyes in the cartoon. I've never seen a single episode of Rick and Morty. Like, God, I was like, and I honestly thought this can't possibly be good. So
the only thing that I know about it is that one of them turns into a pickle. That's all I knew.
Yes.
No, I will say that Rick and Morty is much more cynical than Lower Decks is, but it has the same like nerd level. If you like the nerd level of like Lower Decks, they do a lot of sci-fi parodies and sci-fi commentary and things like that. It's Lower Decks' gimmick is that everyone is so positive, and that's where a lot of the humor comes from. And I think that works for Star Trek. But Rick and Morty is more cynical than that. But I think it's a very good show though, and Mike McMahon was sort of the sci-fi guy in that writing staff. So I love that he got the chance to do a Star Trek show because he's a natural for it.
100%.
And I think that I mean, one of the things that has really changed in Star Trek since we've been doing the show is, I mean, in the Kurtzman era, I like that they try different things. Like one thing you can say, like there's a more of a homogenous attitude to like the Star Trek universe of TNG, DS9, Voyager, Enterprise. They have their differences, but I think one of the advantages of the new Star Trek series that have been going on is they're very different in tone, in style. You know, Lower Decks is very different from Prodigy, which is very different from Discovery, which is very different from Strange New Worlds. And I think that we're getting a lot more variety in Star Trek now than we were then. And they're willing to do different time periods, which gives you, I mean, you get fewer episodes per season and fewer episodes per show, but in the same amount of time, we're getting, you know, the 23rd century, the 32nd century, the 24th century, and so forth. And I think there's a lot more of a opportunity and willingness to experiment in Star Trek than there was in the 90s.
Yeah, I totally agree. And part of that variety, as you were just saying, and was the point that I was thinking as you were saying it, is that you're getting a lot of variety, not just in tone and in content, but in era, because it's hit every various point of the Star Trek timeline. And that's the thing that I love about it, because you're watching Lower Decks and you're very clearly in the 24th century. And then you can watch the next season of Discovery, which is in the 32nd century. And then you get a prequel, and it's just, you know, and now we're going to get section 31, which is going to be set at a different point. And I love that you get these views of all these different points along the number line. It adds to the variety, but it also, you know, in addition to each one having its own tone, each one in a sense, even having its own color palette, because I feel like Strange New Worlds looks very different from Discovery, you know? I love the fact that they are treating every show like it's its own production.
Right.
And I knew people in the 90s who couldn't tell the difference between DS9 and Voyager.
Right.
Because, and to me,
I didn't know there were different ships. I thought all of them were Enterprise. I didn't know, and I didn't know there were different versions of Enterprise.
Are you a pack led?
Yes.
Another Enterprise.
I was pack led.
But I mean, to me, that was strange because I was like in deep in Star Trek. But I mean, they wore the same for a period. They wore the same uniforms in very similar sets. And I don't think you have that as much in the current shows.
And I kind of feel like, except for the fact that DS9 was war set, they all kind of told the same kind of stories.
Right.
Whereas we get a lot of different kinds of storytelling in the modern iteration of Trek, because every show is doing its own thing. Love it.
Yeah, I think one thing the new shows makes you do is confront. One of the essays that I'm working on for our project is has to do with.
Don't jump ahead.
Yeah, there's always been this question: what is Star Trek? There's a podcast I listen to that ends every episode with "What are the morals, meanings, and messages of the episode?" And I remember that reviews I've seen of arguably the most popular Star Trek episode of all time, "The City on the Edge of Forever," definitely one of. A lot of people say it's a great episode, but it's not Star Trek. Why? Because there's no obvious moral there or meaning. And I think that's funny, because I think that Star Trek doesn't have to be that all the time. But it's a weird thing, because if it gets too far from that too often, it's like Charles will sometimes say, like Charles, you said, like sometimes with Strange New Worlds and stuff, you're like, guys, I just kind of want you to go back and explore Strange New Worlds. That's one aspect of track. But if they don't do that, you don't look at an episode and go, that episode sucks because they didn't explore Strange New World. Similarly, if an episode doesn't have an obvious you see Timmy moment or bonk bonk on the head moment, I don't say that's not Star Trek, but some people do. And one of the things that hurt the Lower Decks the first season was people like, this thing getting Star Trek. And you remember even at the end of was it the end of the first season? Remember this? What was the season finale where Burnham gave a speech on what the Federation was supposed to stand for? And even I kind of noticed it felt like they were like, oh yeah, this is what Star Trek is supposed to be. And it felt a little weird. And a lot of people hated Discovery because they're like, there's no moral, there's no meaning, there's no message, you know? It doesn't always have to be that at the same time. So the new shows make me confront, what is Star Trek? Does it have to be a moral every episode? I say no. Does it have to be a Strange New World every episode? I say no. But you want those items incorporated in some shape, form, or fashion sooner or later.
Go back 30 whatever years, and there is a very, very clear parallel in exactly what you're saying, because there were people from the outset who hated DS9 because it did not explore Strange New Worlds.
Yeah.
It was a stationary show. And that was antithetical for a lot of people to what Star Trek is supposed to be about. And I argue, I'm sorry, it's not. It's about the character. It's about exploring what makes us human. It's about morals. It's about, trying to do what's right in a situation, no matter what that situation is. And you don't have to go places in order to do that.
Exactly.
So,
yeah, but that was a new thing for Star Trek.
It was
true when they started DS9. And it was the first Star Trek show that had like main characters who were not Starfleet officers, like Quark. Who were not living by the Star Trek ethos, but also the first Star Trek show that had sets that were not the Starfleet sets. I mean, the Cardassian design of the station was deliberately more dark, and people were upset that it was more dark. It was, like you say, it wasn't going places. And there were people who were resistant to it. I was a 12-year-old Star Trek nerd. I didn't give a shit. I was watching Star Trek no matter what they were doing. I mean? But I mean, there were people who were upset with DS9 because the characters were more flawed than you often got in Star Trek shows, and it was very different. And I mean, I like that. I like that that they were willing to do something so different. I think they were smart to do The Next Generation first, like Alan alluded to earlier, because it was just a modern version of Star Trek before trying something strange. Whereas the new Star Trek era sort of started with something more strange. And then over time has become a little more Star Trek-y, you know what I mean? But I also think the modern Star Trek era is way more, there are people who think that it's not Star Trek-y enough, but I think it's way more reverential and referential to old Star Trek than old Star Trek ever was to itself. I mean, it was a big deal on the old Star Trek shows if like Spock showed up. That might happen once every few seasons, or a Scotty, or a flashback episode. Whereas now it's almost week by week. What is coming back this week? What character? What race?
Right.
To the point that they're hesitant to introduce new things because they're so busy bringing back old things. Now, to be fair, there's a lot more old Star Trek than there was in the 90s to reference. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I think that for me, I mean, it's more a flaw of the new era that they're so referential that there's, and I've said this so many times on the podcast, but there's not the defining cool new species over the last 8 years that you think like, oh yeah, that's the new thing that they've added to Star Trek. Whereas in the 90s, you had, the Ferengi, the Borg, the Dominion, on and on and on, the Hirogen, whatever. But you don't get that as much now because it's like, do you want to see the Hirogen again? Do you want to see the Horta again?
And everyone's like, yes,
the Borg again. And then every show has to do their Borg because everyone has to have their shot at it. Every show has to do their Klingons because everyone, you know what I mean? So you don't get as much new stuff as you did in the old show, which is funny because one of the big criticisms of the new shows is that it's not Star Trek-y enough. But in some cases, I think that it's too Star Trek-y.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, so a couple of things. Wayne says he admits, I am not a Star Trek purist, but what the heck does, quote, it's not Trek mean? That's a very good point. And it's something very personal. Every person who says it means something different when they say that. Because Trek is, as universal as Trek is, it's not the same for every person.
Right. No. Yeah. When you go out and look on the internet and people will just say, this is not Star Trek. Because like Charles will say, if it doesn't go anywhere, it's not Star Trek. If it doesn't have a moral meaning, a message, it's not Star Trek. And then on the flip side, Discovery, I'd say among all the shows, has gotten attacked as not Star Trek because Discovery, by a whole bunch of people, is called woke Trek. And then so there's all these battles online where people will say, they'll say, like, you'll see guys, you got all these kind of these idiots out there. They'll say, oh, they have to force an interracial gay couple and a trans person and a black woman and this and that. And so they call it woke Trek. And then somebody will post a picture from the original series and go, and you were saying, and so that's a weird thing too. So what is Trek, Wayne? That's a hard, like honestly, I don't know if we can answer that question. It's personal. What is Star Trek?
That's right.
It's like, I won't quote the original Supreme Court decision where this came from, but I know it when I see it.
I think it's different for every person because really what that comes down to is this Star Trek is it giving you what you like about Star Trek, and that's different for every person. You know what I mean?
True.
And I mean, they obviously they want to broaden the Star Trek franchise. They want to appeal to new people, but sometimes they take away the things that I like about the franchise to appeal to new people. So, I mean, if you're going to turn it into just a WWE episode, like it's not going to be what I like about Star Trek. You know what I mean?
Me too.
So I think that when they're able to thread that needle is when they're able to broaden it for new people, but also give me what I like about Star Trek. So I keep coming back because ultimately it's people who are going to subscribe to Paramount Plus that are supporting Star Trek, and new people I don't think are going to subscribe to Paramount Plus to see Star Trek, but I will.
Yeah.
There's the problem.
Okay, so a couple of things because we got to take a break and get on to our real topic for this week. Sorry.
Real topic.
Somebody that I don't recognize, K70.
Hey.
I think this might be a new view. Hey, K70. He says, greetings, carbon units.
Greetings,
and I'm sorry that I assumed the pronoun he, because I don't know what am I talking about. But apparently K70 is involved. He and this person and their friends are involved in an animated Star Trek show.
Oh, cool.
So that's
Tell us
interesting.
more about that in the comments.
Yeah, post the link.
Elaine says that Doctor Who has similar issue with alien species. I don't really remember what that's even in reference to. And then Matt says, I think Trek should always be progressive for its time, should always champion the underprivileged, and should challenge the viewer from a moral standpoint. I agree with that.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there was a famous quote from Rod Serling, and he's not Star Trek, but he's sort of Star Trek adjacent, right? And Rod Serling said it's the responsibility of the writer to menace the public's conscience. And I mean, Star Trek is the same thing. And to me, I mean, Gene Roddenberry had a quote about this that I just recently posted on my personal Facebook that was, I mean, essentially that Star Trek was about all of humanity going into space together. You know what I mean? Like it was about humanity celebrating our differences. And so for me, I mean, some people complain that it's like, oh, they're just checking a box. They're just trying to get this group and that group. To me, you should be checking the box. You know what I mean? Because like I love that Star Trek had, you know, a white captain, a black captain, a white female captain, a black male or a black female captain. Like to me, you should, every group of people you can find on Earth should be incorporated into the Star Trek universe because it's about us going out into space together. So I don't put a lot of stock in the complaints that it's too woke, that it's too diverse, because to me, like, Star Trek is about the infinite diversity and infinite combination. So I love that Star Trek does that, and that's something I love that New Trek has sort of embraced, that they have really doubled down on. I mean, Discovery is one of the most progressive shows I've ever seen on TV as far as inclusive. You know what I mean? And I think that Star Trek should be the most progressive show on TV, and it should be. I mean, I'm a fairly progressive person. It should be so progressive that I get uncomfortable. You know what I mean? Like Star Trek should be pushing that. That's where you do it. It's about our future. You know what I mean? We should be old-fashioned in our attitudes compared to the people on Star Trek because they're hundreds of years in the future of us.
Right on.
Also, I think it's important for people to see themselves in the characters on the TV show, especially those that are underrepresented, because seeing that it can be a really positive experience. I'm going to talk about that a little bit in one of the things we're going to talk about next. But I think that's a very important thing.
Yeah. Well, let's just do it. We didn't take a break today, but let's just keep talking, because we wanted to talk a little about we've got a project going on.
Well, hang on.
You want to talk about that?
Hang on.
Okay.
Because the break leads directly into what we're going to be
let's
talking about. It
it
provides a segue, as it were.
Okay.
So let's take a break real quick, and then we'll be right back in 1 minute to talk more Star Trek.
Go right ahead. Welcome back to Earth Station Trek. This is awesome. We're going to be talking about, we've mentioned a few times in recent episodes that we're working on a book, and we're going to be giving you a big preview of that book right now. And for those who are listening on the podcast after our live broadcast, we just ran a 30-second little video preview of the book. The book is called Earth Station Trek Guide to Star Trek. And let me just put this up real quick. That's the thing that we have been working on for a while. And we just showed 2 ads, one for Stellar Fest and one for the book. The plan is that we're going to be launching this book at Stellar Fest. So if you're in the Atlanta / Southeast area, or you want to fly in from England or wherever, when you come to Stellar Fest, you're going to be the first people in the world to get a look at this new book. And this is something we've been working on for a good while now. And we're at the point where, like, most of the work has been written, and my little publishing company is going to be putting it out. And the chapters that have come in are so good. I think that this is going to be I don't think there's any other Star Trek book like this on the market. I think this is going to be unique, and I'm very excited for people to read it. And we're going to be talking a little bit about that in this segment, and kind of giving you a little preview of what you can expect to find in this book. And we've had a couple of comments that noticed the autism in Star Trek on there. So Veronica, you want to kick it off with talking about?
Yeah, why not?
That?
Yeah. So one of the topics is autism in Star Trek. I was finally diagnosed autistic only like 2 years ago. Didn't know anything about it before. And there's a lot of representation in Star Trek that a lot of people didn't necessarily notice. So I'll be talking about a bunch of characters in pretty much every single classic and 90s era Star Trek, and a couple of them from the 2020s Trek.
Hindsight Trek.
Hindsight Trek. There we go. I was trying to remember the word I just made up.
Wow.
And talking about the different characters that have characteristics of autism, whether the character is actually autistic, I will discuss in there a little bit as well. But that's probably my biggest one that's already shaping up to be the length of the other 3 that I'm working on, plus more. I'm also doing a little thing about the Care Bears episodes that were Star Trek parodies, SS Friendship. And I'm talking about my experience in the Subspace Rhapsody picture show cast, and how that went down. And I had another topic, and I'm not remembering what it was, and I don't think I've written much on it yet. But there is another topic I have.
Well, yeah, the exciting thing for me about it, this is not a Star Trek book that's like, like a opinion-free Star Trek book. Like, this is a Star Trek book that is specifically like, it's not a textbook. This is a Star Trek book where we actually have our own chapters, and it's for people giving our guide to Star Trek, what's important about Star Trek to us. And like growing up, I read like every Star Trek book that was out there. And one of the series that I really liked was called Best of Trek, and it was taken from a fan magazine where they would post. I mean, it would include like these opinion pieces and theories, and like before the internet, this was my connection to Star Trek fandom, was reading these essays that were written by just fans. And this is a collection of essays from the four of us giving our opinions of Star Trek, our guide to Star Trek, based upon our very specific points of view. And I mentioned earlier, I sort of talked about my challenging relationship with Discovery in the first couple of years, right? Yeah. I've got a chapter in this book where I'm talking about how much Star Trek Discovery means to me and how much it means to me personally, and sort of relating some of my personal experiences with what has happened on the show since. And because Star Trek Discovery has become a show that has become very personally meaningful to me. And I think it's very important that it's not, I mean, you think of like a dictionary or like an encyclopedia of Star Trek or that sort of thing, that's sort of from a non-perspective. It's just like not even critical, but like an observer,
an episode guide, basically.
Right. But this is not that. This is for people with very specific opinions and very specific life experiences, giving our views of Star Trek. And I think that's something that you don't get a whole lot.
Mm-hmm. It's basically like a podcast, but in printed form. So, I just want to point out, so everybody has been sending their essays to me, and I'm going to be compiling them and editing them and all this kind of, I wasn't going to call you out, Keith.
I know, I got to call myself out. I got to call myself out to keep going.
But when I read the autism chapter that Veronica sent to me, I immediately wrote her back and I said, like, the ones that you have sent me are really good. I think this one is really, really good. I think that this one is going to be one that is going to connect with a lot of people. I think that there's going to be a lot of attention that's going to be drawn by that one chapter. And I think that it's really good. And I think that's going to really speak in a lot of new ways about what Trek is. So,
yay.
And just to give people an idea, like Veronica is also currently working on a paper that's being submitted. You can say this better than I can.
Yeah, so I just started my MSIT program. I'm doing a foundations course because my undergraduate's in theater. And my first class was a coding course. So the rest of people on my team had no idea what to write. And I'm like, let's talk about coding while you're neurodivergent. And we focused on ADHD and autism because I have ADHD and autistic. And at the end of it, my professor I had asked, hey, can we submit it to our college little digital library thing of papers? And he's like, well, actually, I was thinking of suggesting that you submit it to a conference for getting published. Mm-hmm. So I'm reworking that so it doesn't look like a class paper. But I'm hopefully going to be submitting it to a conference and it may be published. But it's coding neurodivergent, and about coding and being autistic and ADHD and the benefits of learning to code and the challenges of coding when you're neurodivergent and that kind of stuff. So it's a thing now.
I just want to, oops, hang on. I didn't mean to put that on the screen. I just want to point out that, let's see, K70, Wayne, Elaine, and there was somebody else, have all commented independently of what we've been talking about, have all commented on that autism in Trek chapter. So clearly I was right in saying that chapter is going to connect with a lot of people. I think that it's going to be really strong. But so Keith, even though I haven't gotten any chapters from you, and I know that they're going to be great, but I know your topics and I know the titles that you've sent me. And I think that there's one there that is going to be as strong as the autism chapter. So do you want to talk about Boma, Stone, and Daystrom?
Yeah, I've said this many times. I'm old enough to remember when seeing strong black men on television and at the movies was a big deal. I mean, I don't really love the movie, but I remember Will Smith saying Independence Day was a big deal because he was a black man and he got to save the earth, and that was in the 90s. And when I grew up, Black actors, well, a lot of time there was a joke. I even told this years ago. My brother-in-law and I, when we went to see Jurassic Park, I'll never forget this. We're there in the theater. And if you remember the beginning of Jurassic Park, there's like this little great white hunter. And he's looking all cool. And there's this old black dude who looked like my dad. And the dude climbed up on the cage and the raptor and velociraptor again. He died. My brother-in-law looked at each other and go, why the black man got to die first? That's a thing. And Alan, other you mentioned that sometimes in like the gay community, there's a thing like we were always the best friend. We died first. So we were the comic relief. And I remember being a kid, and then I remember watching Court Martial. And Kirk, who's this powerful, good-looking, strong white man, walks into an office, and I'm a kid. I'm like 6 years old. And there's a black man, and he dresses him down, and he dresses down a white dude. And I was like, "Holy! I've never seen it before."
Yeah.
But more importantly, and this is huge, he says to Kirk when he was talking, he goes, "Look, Jim, there's not a man in a million that have done what you and I have done. Command a starship." That was a big deal.
Wow.
He was Commodore, and he had commanded a starship.
Yeah.
And I was like, and you just didn't see that because just a few years, right around that time, Huggy Bear was hanging out on Starsky and Hutch. And I love Huggy Bear, but that was Huggy Bear. That ain't the same as the Star. But also no, Huggy Bear was basically the local street pimp who had a heart of gold, who always kind of gave the cops some good information. And it was a thing. And so that was, for me, that was a huge thing to see somebody like me. So when Charles, when you said Star Trek, or you've all said Star Trek should challenge you, and all the people talk about woke track, it's easy when you are a member of a group that doesn't feel left out. And I will say is that, and I'm always very careful to say this, that includes straight white men, because straight white men get left out of stuff too in weird ways. Like you can be a straight white self-titled nerd or geek and you feel left out. And Star Trek should, Mike, I was listening to somebody recently say one thing about Star Trek celebrates intelligence. It really celebrates intelligence. Kirk was a genius, right? And so anyway, I saw Commodore Stone, and then I'll get this, and then later on, Richard Daystrom, they sat there and said he was spoken of in the same breath as Einstein. And for a young 6-year-old seeing that, I was like, holy crap, are you kidding me? And even though he went nuts at the end, he didn't flame out, he didn't flame out like he's never talked about. He just had a mental breakdown. That's a different thing. And then Bulma, Bulma gets on my last nerves and probably should have been disciplined. But again, to have an angry black man who wasn't like burning something was different, and it was daring at the time. So they meant something to me, because what happens a lot of times when you're a person of color is you see a character that's too stereotypical, like too much of a so-called street black, or the flip side, sometimes what Hollywood would do is they'll make a black person too perfect. There's a term called There's a term called magical Negro. I don't know if you've ever heard that term. Spike Lee coined it, and what it literally means is the black person who comes in and is just so happy, and they kind of serve the white people, and they don't seem to have a life, and they don't seem to have a love life, and they don't seem to care about anything but that the white people are happy. And Spike Lee coined it from that movie, The Legend of Bagger Vance, where Will Smith was literally a magical Negro. And so sometimes Hollywood goes one way or the other. You're too much a stereotype. You're like a street thug, or you're perfect black person. And we, like any other group, are in the middle. We are everything. And I love Stone and Bulma and Daystrom, because while one was commander, one was brilliant, one had a loud mouth, they were just regular guys at the same time. They weren't perfect black men, but they also were stereotypical black men. And all these years later, they still mean a lot to me.
Okay, before I jump into Charles giving a little preview of what he's got in store, I do want to get one comment, because you mentioned Court Martial, and Mark says, books, young man, books, thousands of them. If time wasn't so important, I'd show you something. My library, thousands of books.
You're either an obsessive crackpot who's escaped from his keeper, or Samuel T. Cogley, attorney at
There
law.
You go. There you go.
You're right on both counts. Yes.
All right. So, Chuck, tell us a little bit about what's in your quarter of the book.
Yeah, I've said that a little bit already, but I mean, really, it's just about my relationships with Star Trek. And some of that is, I mean, things as simple as just growing up an obsessive Star Trek nerd. I mean, I would lay awake at night as a young teen or preteen reading the Star Trek encyclopedia like it was a novel. You know what I mean? Where it has entries about different characters. And then, I mean, there was plenty of times riding in the car with my mom when I would just talk about what they got wrong on the latest Star Trek episode because it was. But I mean, sort of
there was no one else to talk to.
And she would say, "That's nice, dear," and have no idea what I said. But I mean, sort of how that has evolved as I've gotten older and have a deeper understanding of storytelling. But also in sort of my experiences with Star Trek, and Star Trek needs to grow. But also, I tend to look at my life through Star Trek and look at Star Trek through my life, and so how sort of that evolution has changed. Like I was talking about before, where I had a very contentious relationship with Discovery in the first couple of seasons, and in part because it was inconsistent, wasn't in some cases good, but also it wasn't what I wanted it to be. But then it became something, and it wasn't until watching all the way through Discovery that it really, the impact of that show on me really hit me. And so I have an essay where I'm talking a little about that. An essay where I'm talking sort of, I mean, and we talk about this on the show, but like Strange New Worlds is not consistent with the original series, right? And I don't know if that's a good thing or not. And I examined that in one of the essays that I'm working on. And one that I'm working on that I haven't finished yet is sort of talking about, I've been a person, Star Trek presented the future as our social development and our technological development went hand in hand, right? But now we're sort of at a place in the future where social development and technological development have sort of diverged
completely.
And you have like the tech bros and the people who were responsible for space travel and people like Buzz Aldrin who are championing the US going into fascism and stripping rights from people because they support the space program. And so it has become difficult as an adult to support both the space program and the things that I feel are right as socially. You know what I mean? Like it's become difficult to get excited and post about the latest SpaceX rocket when the guy who owns SpaceX is literally doing Nazi signs at the presidential inauguration. You know what I mean? And so sort of how that dichotomy, it's become a difficult and it's become a challenge. And the Star Trek future that I've always believed in has led me to believe that, like it was in the 60s, like we're developing rockets while we're breaking down barriers, while we're addressing racism and sexism and women's rights and civil rights, and we're going to the moon. And that's what the arc of humanity is we're becoming smarter and we're reaching out into the stars and we're creating rights for people that weren't there before. And then I get to my adult life where it seems like all of the people who care about rockets and space and going to Mars want to take us back socially to the 1860s. And the people who want to go to the future think that it's just the billionaires who care about rockets and it's a waste of money. You know what I mean? So it's I haven't finished that essay yet because I can't even describe it very well. But it's something that really matters to me because I really think that you can do both. I think that you can build a better life on Earth and we can reach out into the stars. I don't think that you have to choose, but it seems like the rest of the world thinks you have to choose. And it's gotten to the point where I've got a couple of SpaceX t-shirts because I was such a supporter of them 10 years ago that I would be embarrassed to wear today because the people who care about electric cars and rockets that can land themselves also want to strip rights from trans people and immigrants. And I mean, they just today I was reading about how they were trying to strip birthright citizenship from Native Americans. You know what I mean? But they're the ones who want to take us to space. And it's like, are we going to go to space? And if we do, are we going to be the Ferengi or the Mirror Universe when we get there?
Yeah.
You know, Charles, what I find so interesting, what you said, that is the absolute essence what Gene Roddenberry was saying in Star Trek, because I never lose sight of the fact that now the timelines have changed, but I never lose sight of the fact that Gene Roddenberry posited the future of Kirk, Spock, McCoy, Cisco, and so forth. And we went through the eugenics war and World War III, which became separate things. And to your point, in the original series, we had the Mirror Universe, which was be careful what we can become. So I think Gene Roddenberry himself said, you know, that's what they mentioned. We barely made it. And how many planets in Star Trek look like the Vulcans? The Vulcans knocked themselves back like 1,000 years because of their own, you know, their own passions and stuff like that. And so I think what you said, that is an absolute Star Trek message. Ever since I was a kid, I've been thinking about the way you said it. And what I was hoping was, and I hope this doesn't happen, I hope we don't have to destroy ourselves to rebuild ourselves again, because that's getting kind of old in human history. But Roddenberry said we did it. I hope we don't. But what you're saying, I agree. I feel exactly like that.
So, in case there was any doubt in anyone's mind about this book will definitely have some opinions.
Yeah.
Will definitely have some very closely held convictions. It's not going to be it's going to be a good book. I'm telling you. So
Alan, did you give us a preview of yours?
Well, for mine, we're each doing 5 chapters, and mine are 3 serious ones and 2 not at all serious ones. I mean, one of them is literally just a countdown of my 11 favorite cliffhangers in all of Star Trek, because I couldn't narrow it down to 10. So I did 11. But but the other 3 are very serious. And one of them, and it's the one that I titled, "What Does God Need with a Starship?" And it's all about, it's something that we've never really talked much about on the show. And it's a topic that I've always wanted us to get to. And that is the different ways that religion is depicted in Star Trek. And I have a very complicated relationship with religion over the course of my life. And I've changed perspectives on it many, many times. And, and I just love the fact that science fiction incorporates religion in different ways, and a lot of times it's it's never us that has the religion. It's always somebody that we encounter, and it's either to show how different they are, how alien they are, or how primitive they are. And it's usually like, here's a culture that worships a thing that turns out to be a satellite in orbit or something like that, something with a known explanation for us, not something that they realize. But Star Trek has done a lot of things other than that too. They've done a lot of those kind of things, but they've done a lot of things beyond that. And those are the ones that really intrigue me, the way that science and religious belief not only live together in these worlds, and I think more particularly in DS9 than anywhere else, but that they mesh in a certain way. And so I have a chapter that kind of explores that. So it's going to be a heavy book, except for the 2 chapters that I wrote that are just completely silly.
It'll be a fun book too.
It's going to be a lot of variety.
Yeah, I've got some silly stuff and some serious stuff, and I think we all will.
Mm-hmm.
And before we move on, I just want to say, because Keith mentioned Mr. Boma earlier, and Mr. Boma gets a bad rap because he was giving Spock a hard time, and we all love Spock. But if you watch that episode, Mr. Boma was right. He was a jerk, but he was right.
There you go.
Yes, yeah, that's true.
So I am really excited about this book. I mean, I proposed this idea to the other 3, last year. And originally we were kind of thinking, we should have it out by Dragon Con. And that was September. So our plan now is that it'll be ready in April. We will have it at Stellarfest. And based on the chapters that I have seen, I'm really impressed, and I'm really excited about how this book is going to turn out. And I think it's going to be great. And also, I should mention before we go, let me just mention super quick, if I can find the image, the cover art is by somebody. If you're on the con circuit, you probably know this is Mark Maddox, who is an 8-time Rondo Award-winning artist who has done interiors and covers for every horror and sci-fi magazine that you can imagine that you've ever seen on a bookshelf in Barnes & Noble or wherever. He has done cover art for, including Doctor Who magazine and Scream and Horror Hound and all these things. And he's a big Star Trek fan. And so I had this cover commissioned 6 years ago for a Star Trek book that I was going to write. And it's a long story. I'm not going to go into it.
Are you serious? Because it turns out perfect. There's 3 males and a female.
Exactly. Exactly. No, seriously. I commissioned it. I think it was 6 years ago. Yes.
Yeah. We'll let the readers decide which one's which.
Right. But so I'm just really, really excited for people to see this book. And once it's out at Stellarfest, people who are at Stellarfest will have the opportunity to purchase the book, and we'll all be there. So we'll all sign it, and we're going to have a book release event and all kinds of great stuff. And then it'll be available throughout the rest of the world for anybody to buy anywhere in the country or beyond the country or even beyond the solar system. What do I know?
Yep.
So again, that's the first weekend in April.
Yeah.
So
And
look
like I
for
alluded
it.
to earlier, I've been reading every Star Trek book I could find my entire life. Reference books, fan books, whatever the case may be. And one thing that every Star Trek book has in common is that I am not in it. And so that oversight is finally being rectified, and the world can turn as it should.
Right. So that's it for us this week. We are going to be back next Thursday at 8 p.m. and we are going to be talking about Star Trek Section 31.
Yep.
And I think earlier Wayne asks the question, what does that's not really Star Trek. What does that mean? We might find out tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something I want to say about that, because I mean, over the last, I'd say 15, 16 years, the Star Trek fandom has been very divided. There's people who love the new stuff, from the JJ verse to the Kurtzman Trek, and people who hate it, people who only like the old stuff, people who love the new stuff. Very snippy between. And I haven't seen this new one yet. I'm going into it with an open mind. But one thing that it seems so far is that this has been the Star Trek that has been uniting everybody, and that everyone seems to hate it. So we're going to find out next week what we think. We're going into it open mind. We want it to be good. We always want Star Trek to be good. But if it's not, you're going to hear about it next Thursday.
Section 31, the great unifier.
Right. Yeah. Finally a cause we can all unify behind.
Yes. Hey, but before we go, I got one last thing. This will take 1 second, real quick. I just wanted to read this real quick because we all saw this. We were very touched. This was it's on Facebook. It says, "How do you spend 4.5 hours on a road trip from my home in North Georgia down to Moultrie, catching up on the last few weeks of the Earth Station Track podcast? That's how. It sure made the time go by quickly. Especially love the interview with Mark McConnell and the insights into pitching Star Trek. At the end, even he was ready for more." And I do remember that. He's kind of like, "Oh, we done now?" Great job, Charles Kelso, Veronica Dashiell, Keith Johnson, and R. Alan Seiler. And that's from our friend Stephen T. Fowler. We really appreciate that, especially when we're talking about 200 episodes. That warmed our hearts. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, man. That was such a great comment. And that that's the kind of thing that just makes you want to keep doing this.
Yes. Yeah.
That and people never stop making new Star Trek. So, there's always new stuff to talk about.
Right.
All right. Well, Alan, where can people find more of you?
Well, if you want more information about all the weird things that I get involved in, which are 2 other podcasts and which I produce, and a whole bunch of books that I've written, and that new Earth Station Trek Guide to Star Trek, that new book that we've been talking about for the last half hour, you can go to cosmiccreative.com, KOZMIC creative.com, and you'll find information, newly released information about our book right there on that website.
And how about you, Keith?
You can find me on Facebook, primarily the ESO Network Facebook groups.
And how about us, Veronica?
FeltNerdy.com.
Or
Monkeying Around, a podcast about the monkeys.
And do you have a closing for us this week?
Get your guide to Earth Station Trek, Star Trek. I didn't say that right. Get your guide to Star Trek by Earth Station Trek. Earth Station Trek Guide to Star Trek. Earth Station Trek Guide to Star Trek. Get it now. Or when you can order it.
It's got a title you won't forget.
Unless you're Veronica who forgets everything.
Join us next Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern, when we will either be swimming upstream and talking about how much we love Section 31, or you're going to hear some opinions. Right? Either way, maybe we'll all love it. Maybe we'll all hate it. That's the fun thing about this show. So join us next week, and we're going to find out 8 p.m. Eastern. We go live on YouTube, or you can find us afterward on YouTube or on your favorite podcast platform.
Right on. All right, everybody, have a great
Take care.
Take care. See ya. And keep trekking on.